Welcome to Scouting Heritage, Requirement 4C. Now, in Requirement 4, ideally, you go to a jamboree, but that doesn't work for everybody. And normally, we go to a scouting museum. But again, that's not always an option. So instead, I've called in some favors and I brought in some uniforms to hopefully show you. The first one we're going to start off with is this one right here. This is Generation 1 Scout uniform. This is something you would see from about 1911 until about 1920. And if you know your history, this is, well, it looks an awful lot like a World War I U.S. uniform, and you'd be right. There are, however, some differences. If you look closely, you can see scout buttons. Now, the scouts did this for a reason, because they recognized when they were trying to get scouting going, that if someone could go down to a surplus store and buy a uniform cheap, they were more likely to be able to join scouts. Now, this person was in Troop 1, and if you know anything about troop numbers, there are very few Troop 1s these days, and that's because now Troop 1 is known as the Adult Wood Badge Troop. Also, this individual made it to first class, and back then, your merit badges went on your sleeve, and you can see that this individual earned at least one merit badge. I believe it's civics, and there's at least the evidence of another one. But unfortunately, whoever had this uniform at some point in time decided to cut the merit badge off because obviously there was a value issue. But it's still kind of cool because, I mean, this uniform right here is over 100 years old. So I'm going to move it over here carefully. And right next to it, we have a pair of trousers. I don't know if you can see these. These are jodhpurs. If you look, they got that funny thing at the bottom. They look like riding trousers. These were the standard trousers for Boy Scouts from 1911 until the end of World War II. If you wore shorts, you wore shorts, but there weren't normal long trousers back then. That came after World War II. And these jodhpurs actually came not with the World War I uniform, but with this uniform right here. So this guy here, this is a uniform that he wore. He was from Oakland, California, Troop 31, and he attended the 1939 World's Fair. 1939-1940 World's Fair in New York City. Now think about that. Back then, if you were going to travel from Oakland, California to New York City, that was at best maybe a 4 to 5 day train trip. So this was pretty cool for this kid to have gotten to be there, and this is his uniform. If you look closely, you can see their metal buttons here. You may wonder what the heck is going up with the no collar. That was something that was very common for a long time because you were supposed to wear your neckerchief almost the whole time. Now we have a post-World War II uniform right here. I'm pulling back so you can see it. This guy, I say guy because if you look carefully, he's an Eagle Scout. And it looks like he is probably an assistant scoutmaster or a junior assistant scoutmaster. He was from Great Falls, Montana. Now, obviously, when scouting started very early on, there weren't necessarily councils, and council strips weren't very common. Instead, it was more common to have these right here. If you noticed at the previous uniform, they were green. But by the end of World War II, they had gone to red, and these council strips would go in and out into the 1970s. Also, I don't know if you can see this, but this uniform is wool, which would be really great in the winter, but not so wonderful in the summer. It has a collar here because this guy is a junior assistant scoutmaster. He's probably 17 years old, and having become an Eagle Scout, he decided to stay in his troop, which I think is an awesome thing. This uniform right here is from the mid-1950s. And if we look closely, we can see this guy is a second-class scout. He's from the Piedmont Area Council in Virginia. He's in Troop 9. If you look, this is the right shape for our modern council patches, but obviously it doesn't have the decorations that our modern ones do. He's also, and this would be recognizable, he's a den chief, and it looks like he's in the Panther Patrol. Now, the really cool thing about this uniform, however, is this patch right here, Camp Monacan. So if you live in Virginia and you've ever been to Wintergreen Resort, which is a ski resort, that's actually an old Boy Scout camp. It was Camp Monacan. And in fact, if you go to Wintergreen during the summer, the Camp Lake is still there, and it's called Camp Monacan Lake. It was the lake, that was the camp for basically Lynchburg, Amherst, Nelson County, Charlottesville. And again, you can see this uniform. It's a little greener, but it's still got that missing V shape, right? For your neckerchief, because you're always expected to wear one. Now this is my Scout uniform. This was my first Scout uniform. Let's see, pull it back. Now I joined Scouts in 1980. And the next year, we went from a green uniform to a tan uniform. So this is what the green uniform looked like. Obviously, I got my Arrow of Light, my God and Country. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I'm also a den chief, Troop 11. I was in the Blue Ridge Mountain Council. This patch right here, you all recognize that. That's the International Scouter patch. Everyone wears that today. When I was a scout, the only way you could wear that was if you had actually been a scout overseas. And I was a scout overseas. I was not only in the Red Warrior Patrol, but I was also in, it's the downside to not having an assistant, I was in the 3rd Oxford. And so this is my troop number, and these are my council patches, the Isis River and the Oxfordshire badge. So I lived in England for a year, and while I was in England, I worked on scout ranks. And this is my scout card. See my membership card, there I am. And you can see that I earned Scout, which is actually what this badge right here is. That's the Scout badge in England. And then I also earned Scout Standard, which would be the equivalent of Tenderfoot. So having shown you a U.S. uniform of someone who went overseas, I want to show you one last uniform. This guy right here, pull back. This is a Scout uniform from the 1950s. This is a British Scout uniform. This kid was from Buckinghamshire, which is the county next to Oxford. This patch right here tells you that he went to a jamboree, a world jamboree, and in fact, according to the owner of this, it came with the 50th anniversary of Scouting neckerchief slide. He's also patrol leader, and he was in Scouts for 8 years total, and 2 years as a rover, which we know today as venturing. Over here, you can see his rover patch. Also, these are some of the badges he earned as a Cub Scout, so he was in for a long time. Recognize that? That's 2nd class. That's Tenderfoot over there. And over on this side, we have his 1st class badge. Not too dissimilar. In British Boy Scouting at the time, badges that were like art, leatherworking and so forth would be worn on the right arm. And then more important ones like first aid would be worn on the left arm. Now, when they went to the tan uniform in the early 1980s, this was actually the inspiration. So, speaking of inspiration, let's move over to books. And let's face it, without this book, we would not have Scouting. This is Scouting for Boys. This is Baden-Powell's book that started all. Now, when Scouting came to the U.S., there were actually other organizations that were trying to do Scouting, but not quite there yet. One of them was Dan Beard's American Boys, and you can see this is the handbook here. Dan Beard is one of those people you have to look up in Requirement 2. This is a copy of the original Scout Manual. They are so rare. I would love to have an original, but I don't. But these two right here, this is the 1914 and this is the 1927. These are original. They came from a guy who actually was an Eagle Scout. Cool thing about the 27, it has an amazing selection of information on trees. So if you ever have to do drawings of trees, it is the one to go to. It's 1940, 1952, 1956, 1972. Scouting really changed in the early 70s. They tried to make scouting more relevant. Part of it was the introduction of the beret, which is both loved and hated in scouting history. And then this is the 1980 through about 1990 Scout Manual. It's actually one of the most useful ones because if you look on the back, it has all these things and you can turn to the side and find it very quickly. Also, I have a collection of other manuals and so forth, just so you can see. This is Scoutmaster's Handbook from the 1930s and one from the late 50s. Most of the information is the same. So Patrol Leader's Handbook from the 1930s, but these continue to be used until the 1950s. The Order of the Era. The Order of the Era is very important in scouting. And the handbook has changed over time. This is from the 60s. This one is from the early 1980s. Merit badges. So this is what a very early merit badge book looks like. Very early. If you remember back to that Scout uniform, the first generation, this is what the patches kind of look like. Now, over time, this is a 1950s style one. And then this is what merit badge books look like in the 1980s. Additionally, if you're looking for Scout stuff, and some people like to collect cool Scout stuff, there are oftentimes these little booklets that show up every once in a while. This one is called the neckerchief, and it just goes through all the cool things that you can do with a neckerchief. One of the things, if you have some free time, that I'd suggest you do is check out the list of merit badges, because they've changed over time, but there's some that have just been there forever. We also have a Scout Field Book, which is pretty cool, with lots of useful stuff. It's amazing because even though, obviously this book came out in the early 1950s, the stuff on where snakes are located is still relevant today. Then finally, just for fun, this is my British Scout book. It's a little cartoony, but this is how other people do it. And that's one of the neat things about scouting is it's a worldwide movement. Some random kind of weird things. In the 1920s and teens and into the 1940s, there were a variety of Scout books that were produced. You got to understand there's no internet. Movies are silent. So a lot of people read to stay from being bored. And like the Boy Scouts on the Trail, that makes sense. But this one I have yet to completely figure out. The Boy Scouts in Turkey. It's written in 1916. It's basically how the Boy Scouts are being spies for the Allied cause, which is somewhat awkward because America wasn't in World War I yet. There are also lots of random kind of interesting Scout stuff that shows up every once in a while. This is Scout First Aid Kit. Still got a lot of the stuff in it. If you're interested in collecting Scout junk, as my mother used to like to call it, yard sales are the best place to go. Now, one of your assignments that you have to do for Scouting Heritage Merit Badge is to present a collection of patches. And so I'm going to just show you a couple here. This is an Order of the Era patch. It's from Camp Shannon. It's from the Shenandoah Lodge, 258. They think they're really great. It's a fake. One of the things you have to be careful whenever you're buying old patches is it real or is it made up? That's a fake. This one right here is a kind of cool patch. There are BSA scouting chapters all over the world. And this one came from a friend of mine who served in England in a U.S. scout troop that was attached to an Air Force base. And so this was a patch they got for on a camporite in Normandy. This is this is one of my patches, the Monacan Camporee in 1983 in the Central District of Blue Ridge Mountain Council. Now this is almost the same patch as the Camp Monacan patch. And in the early 80s, the Monacan tribe was trying to get recognition by the state, and the state of Virginia was denying them, basically saying they didn't exist. And so Central District Boy Scouts decided to try to help promote the Monacans because they had a connection with the Monacans. And so they did a number of things to help fundraise it, and this is an example. I got a couple Jamboree patches here. This was from a group from England. This is also another English patch that I picked up when we were at the Jamboree back in 2019. Council patches are always a fun thing to collect. This is my wood badge, 100 years of wood badge. This is a French patch, which I picked up at the Jamboree. This is an old Hawaiian patch. Again, not necessarily. The thing about it is when you collect patches, it's a really affordable and cool thing to do and doesn't cost a lot of money. Just a couple more and then I'll let you go. This is from my time in scouting. The year of the scout was 1982. Mexican scouting, and then this is a National Jamboree patch, which is pretty cool. This one's slightly oversized. There are two different types of patrol patches. There are those that are official that you find everywhere, and then there are the ones that people make. And sometimes people collect the made ones because they're kind of unique. So this is the Theodore Roosevelt Patrol. And finally, the last thing I want to show you, it is not an original. I could not hope to afford one, but this is what we're supposedly all working for. This is a copy of the original Eagle Scout badge. This is what it would have looked like in 1911. Anyway, that is a brief tour of a scouting museum. I hope you enjoyed it.